You're Mahagad Kirlig, and I'd like to welcome Minister Deenahan to the House. You're welcome as always, Minister, and it's particularly welcome to have you here today on this auspicious date, which is, of course, the 750th anniversary of the first recorded sitting of Parliament in Ireland on 18th June 1264, as others have said. And indeed, it's particularly auspicious because that date was the first Wednesday after the Feast of the Holy Trinity, and interestingly, the 750th anniversary occurs on the same date, day, and religious calendar date, so it's particularly auspicious today. I'd like to welcome my many distinguished visitors here in the gallery, and indeed in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery, who are here specifically for this debate, and apologise that we had to delay the start of the debate due to the workings of Parliament, about which others have spoken. I have the distinguished visitors here with us from Trinity College, who have a particular interest in the history of parliamentary democracies, but also members of the Castledermot Historical Society in County Kildare, and you're very, very welcome indeed. I should just single out, however, one of the guests, and that is Assistant Professor Paul Horan, who's a colleague of mine in Trinity, in fact in the School of Nursing, but who really instigated this commemorative debate today, because Paul emailed me some time ago, bringing to my attention the fact that this year marked the 750th anniversary of the first parliamentary sitting. I met with Paul, we spoke about it, we did a bit of research into it. I checked the Oireachtas website and found, to my surprise, that on the Houses of the Oireachtas website it says the earliest known Irish Parliament for which there is a definitive record met on 18th June 1264 at Castledermot in County Kildare. So it was already noted on the Oireachtas website. I then brought it to the Committee on Procedure and Privilege in this House and got unanimous support, I must say, and I want to thank the leader for arranging the debate on foot of the CPP's agreement. So it's really, I think it's really important that we would have this sort of debate, that we would mark important historical dates, and that we would have commemorative debates. And Minister, you've been to the fore in ensuring that we do have appropriate commemorative ceremonies in this decade of centenaries, as we call it. Of course, 750 years goes back a lot further than any of the other events we are marking in this decade. But I think it's nonetheless important that we would mark it, and I do thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us. I also think it's important to mark particularly important dates in the history of parliamentary democracy in Ireland. I mean, in December 2008, shortly after I'd been elected for the first time, I arranged an event to commemorate the first election in which women were elected, in which women had the right to vote and in which women were elected. And that was, of course, the election of December 1918. And again, others have spoken about that election. It was a hugely significant election in many ways, of course, in Irish history, but it was also significant because it was the first time women had the right to vote, and it was the first time we saw a woman elected to either to both the British Parliament and to the Irish Parliament. Of course, that was Constance Markievicz, the first woman MP and TD, and we marked that election with a photograph of all the women who were still alive who had ever been elected to either House of the Oireachtas, and this sitting in the Dáil chamber. And that photograph, for the guests who haven't seen it, is on display now in the Leinster House corridor. That was the 90th anniversary of the 1918 election, and Minister, I very much hope that when we come to the centenary of that election, that we'll mark it as an important date for women as well as an important date in Irish history. Now, there's no photographic record available, of course, of the 750th on this 750th anniversary, no photograph or visual image of that parliamentary gathering. But nevertheless, thanks to the great work of Paul Horan, we do have a good deal of information about it, and thanks indeed, I should say, to the recording by the archbishops. There is a record subsisting of the meeting on 18th of June 1264, contained in the Liber Niger, the Black Book of Christchurch, the register of the key diocesan archives of Dublin and Glendalough from the 12th to the 14th century, normally on display to the public in the crypt of Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin. Now, we are very fortunate that that record exists because, of course, with the destruction of so many ancient state records in the blowing up of the Public Records Office in the Four Courts in June 1922, we've lost a great deal of records of early gatherings of this sort. So we're very fortunate that a manuscript record survives. Paul has written an article that is in the current issue of History Ireland, which really provides the background and a summary of the material in the diocesan register. And he writes about his own interest in this as coming from his family connection to Castledermot in County Kildare. But he then goes on to look at what the record says, the document says about the gathering. What was this gathering? In fact, it's described, and I've got the the record here from Archbishop Allen's register, and of course there was there's a Latin version, but I won't trouble colleagues with that. But the English translation says the 1264 June 18 Inquisition at the Parliament of Tristeldermid, as it was then called, Wednesday after the Feast of Holy Trinity, 48 Henry III, before Sir Richard de Rupel, Chief Justice of Ireland. And it goes on then to list the members who were present, and indeed there were 32 persons present. 32 persons present. Others have spoken about the makeup of these people. There were knights, they were described as knights and jurors, but there was also there the Bishop of Meath and Treasurer of Ireland, Hugh of Tachmon, the Chancellor, the first Baron of Trim, and various others. These were key officials and magnates of state and landowning knights. All men, of course, that goes without saying at that time. But interestingly, what the Inquisition was about was the conduct of an archbishop, Archbishop Fulk de Sandford. And the Inquisition, as Mr. Horan writes, sought to adjudicate on the matter of the rights of Archbishop Fulk de Sandford and as against those of the then Lord of Ireland, Prince Edward, son of Henry III. And there was an interesting footnote, of course, that at the time Henry III and his son were actually prisoners of Baron Simon de Montfort, who subsequently summoned the first Parliament of elected members in England in December 1264, so just some months after this first parliamentary sitting in Ireland. So we, of course, beat the English yet again on another important historic date. Not only did we elect the first woman MP, but we also had predated that first parliamentary sitting. And the Inquisition in Castledermot about Archbishop Fulk was in fact about whether the church, that is the Archbishop, or the state in the form of the English King's representative as Lord of Ireland, could hold courts and exercise justice. So it was a classic church-state struggle, in fact, as to whether Fulk had, as the original record says, whether he had, in his time, took arbitrarily to the loss and prejudice of the Lord Edward and his liberties. And it goes on to explain that the Archbishop had pleaded in his court all pleas of the Crown, that the Archbishop had therefore, it appeared, been taking it upon himself to deal with matters that should have been matters of state. And this really does bring us to, I suppose, a very contemporary theme of church-state relations. The state allowing the church, effectively, to take on many of aspects of governance that the state should have been taking on. And I think we do see, and many others have spoken about the history of the struggle for independence in Ireland, Home Rule, and the subsequent events in 1916 and so forth. But what we have seen, I think, since the emergence of the Irish state in the 20th century is a continuing tendency where the state has allowed the church, of course a different church, the Catholic Church rather than the English Church, but the Catholic Church, to take on the mantle really of a shadow welfare state, as it's been described, to run our education and healthcare institutions, to run our social provision institutions, to the great detriment, I think, of the people of Ireland. And we've seen in terms of, and I hasten to add, of course, there's been huge benefit to it. It's not to underestimate the immense work that religious orders did in carrying on the work that the state should have been doing. But the reality was that that system lacked the democratic legitimacy and accountability to Parliament that institutions of the state would have. And I think overall it's meant our republic has not been as strong as it should have been. Now I know we are remedying that. I think it's hugely important that we've had the sort of debates we've had in recent years around the running of Magdalen institutions, the running of mother and baby homes, which is the current debate, and so on. I think it's also hugely important that our constitution guarantees freedom of religion. But I would say that freedom of religion is only possible to be exercised in a republic, truly exercised in a republic where we have genuine separation of church and state, where no one religion is elevated above those of the others. And I suppose, reading back the old record from 750 years ago, we're reminded that plus ça change, plus c'est les mêmes choses. Thank you.
Senator O'Sullivan.